It's my honor to recall to the microphone Professor Alan Dershowitz, the Felix Frankfurter Professor of Law Emeritus at Harvard Law School, as the moderator for the panel Justice After Nuremberg, What Have We Learned? The Supreme Court Justices' Reflections. Professor Dershowitz.
Thank you. I hope you all have learned as much as I learned listening to the morning session, not only intellectually, but obviously emotionally, listening to the accounts of a survivor and listening to the academic statements by so many brilliant people. I feel myself a close connection to human rights in the Nuremberg Trials. My favorite professor, my mentor at Yale Law School, was Telford Taylor. He was the chief prosecutor at Nuremberg following the major trials of Justice Jackson. And when I was a second-year student at Yale, Telford Taylor invited me to come with him to Israel, where he was going to be commentating for radio on the Eichmann trial. And fortunately or unfortunately, I'd just been elected editor-in-chief of the Yale Law Journal, and I couldn't do it. And I missed an opportunity to be at the Eichmann trial with Telford Taylor. I did ultimately attend the trial of John Demjanjuk in Israel, which showed the Israeli legal system at its best, even though everybody knew that John Demjanjuk, if not Ivan the Terrible, was another terrible Ivan who had been a hands-on perpetrator of the Holocaust. The Israel Supreme Court, as you know, reversed his conviction, and the decision was written by the president of the Supreme Court, Aharon Barak, who himself was a victim of the Holocaust, had hidden in a wall during the Shoah in Lithuania and Latvia, in those areas. And the ability of the Israeli legal system to do justice to somebody who had such blood on his hands because he had been charged with the wrong offense is really a remarkable tribute. And then, of course, I'm so proud of Samantha Powers, who was my student, and I was one of her mentors. And I have to tell you, she missed a lot of classes during the year she was with me. She was writing this book on genocide and going off to all parts of the world, but those are the best kinds of students. There's a Hebrew expression, Medor Lador, from generation to generation, and as teachers, I think we experience that. So here we have my teacher, Telford Taylor, my student, my friend Ben Ferenz, who I've known for years and years and years, and who's still actively speaking up at the age of, I think, 93 or 90, I think he's 96 now, perhaps. Amazing generational issues to these matters. And so now we're going to have a very interesting session that involves some of the greatest jurists in the world today. Jurists who have sat in courts ranging from Great Britain to Canada to Israel to Rwanda, and they're going to share with us their experiences in dealing with human rights issues. And we're going to try very hard in this program to stick to our time limits and to provide for at least enough time for some discussion. And so each of the justices will make an opening statement, and then we'll have an opportunity to question each other and for me to question them and to have a conversation. And we're going to go a little bit out of order from what is on the program, and we're going to start with one of the greatest jurists in the world today, the Honorable Lord John Dyson, who is Master of the Rolls and Head of Civil Justice in Great Britain. He is the second-ranking jurist in Great Britain today, has had extraordinary experience at the bar and the bench, and will share with us some of his experiences. So it's my great honor to introduce the Honorable Lord John Dyson.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to say a few preliminary remarks. I'm truly privileged to be here for this event, this remarkable event in this beautiful city and in this beautiful university. I've not been to the city or the university before. It's almost as beautiful as Oxford. And I do want to pay tribute to the organizers for putting on a fantastic event. And the speakers that we've heard this morning. I think they've all, in their different ways, been brilliant. The range of their contributions has been astounding. And who will ever forget the finale just before lunch from Edward Mossberg, and that a man shaking with intense anger and describing his experiences with remarkable articulacy. For a man of his age, I don't know how old he is, but he's obviously pretty old. As a British Jew, I have to confess that I have led a very charmed life, and I'm very conscious, having heard all the contributions this morning, but a lot of them searing contributions delivered with great intensity, that I'm almost apologetic for the fact that I come from a jurisdiction, from a city, London, and an environment which, on the whole, is polite, is measured, and where temperatures do not tend to rise. I say I feel slightly apologetic about that. I'm not apologetic in the sense that I think it's a bad thing, because I think that is the right way in which justice should be delivered. But for the fact that in the UK we are and have been blessed to have avoided direct contact with the terrible things that have been described and which have really given rise to this event. So far in my life, the UK has been very tolerant of minorities, and even though one senses, and I've often sensed, that there is a certain amount of anti-Semitism just gently bubbling beneath the surface, but it rarely, at least in my experience, it rarely actually surfaces itself. There have been some recent departures from that, which some of you may have read about, which I find deeply troubling developments in the Labour Party. It's not for me as a serving judge to make political speeches, and I have no intention of doing so. I think one of the excellent things is that our government has always been a very strong opponent of anti-Semitism and a strong supporter of Israel. And I think that's really all I want to say about what's happening in the UK. There are deeply moving developments in France and other countries in Europe, extremely worrying. The revival of anti-Semitism, the growth of nationalism, and one has an awful feeling that we've been here before. And that's why so many French Jews are now to be found in London. I understand there are so many French Jews now to be found in growing numbers in Israel. And this is all terribly worrying, and that is why it is so important that the flame that the people like the people that have been speaking to us this morning are guarding, that should be kept burning very brightly indeed. And that's why it's so important to encourage as many as possible, especially young people, to do things like going to visit Auschwitz, and why the work done by the Centers for Holocaust Studies all over the world is so important, and why the March of the Living itself, in my view, is so important. Although I've said that I've led a charmed life, and I really have, I am a first-generation Jew on my mother's side and a second-generation Jew on my father's side. But there is no Jew, and I'm certainly not one of them, who has not been touched by the Holocaust. My grandmother on my mother's side spent 6 months in Bergen-Belsen. She was, in one sense, fortunate in that she was living in Budapest in 1944 and was able to get onto the Kastner train. But instead of going straight to Switzerland, she went to Belsen and spent 6 terrible months there. A great uncle of mine and his wife were deported from Berlin to Auschwitz in 1943 and perished there almost immediately. And that was the same year in which a great uncle of my wife, who is here today, he was living in Marseille, and he too was deported. He was deported from Marseille to Auschwitz, and he perished there within days of his arrival. And that is a microcosmic example of the terrible things that happened, with Jews being transported from all over Europe, focusing on these terrible extermination centers like Auschwitz. And so for me, going to Auschwitz tomorrow will be, I know, a very moving thing. I have to confess, I do have a slight sense of foreboding about it, but I'm sure I shall be extremely moved by the experience. On my father's side, his parents came when they were 19 from Lithuania. They clearly survived in England, but I have no idea how many members of his family perished. I'm sure many did. So all of this is the background to why I think that the Nuremberg trial was so important. And you've heard so much about it already that I'm not going to cover ground that's already been covered by others this morning, and which I suspect we may touch upon in discussions in a few minutes. I'll just say this. I think it is remarkable that instead of shooting these appalling people, as Churchill wanted to do and the Russians and the Soviets wanted to do, they faced a trial with due process, legal representation, and so on. Of course, there were many legal problems involved in setting up this international tribunal, something which had not been done before. And things like how you define the crimes, the problem of creating crimes with retroactive effect, who to choose to prosecute, all manner of problems. And it's very easy for purist lawyers to have a sense of unease about the way things being done, perhaps not fitting with a purist's idea of the rule of law. And it's certainly not something that, certainly in a domestic context, in a more conventional context, any of us, I think, would contemplate as being acceptable. It wouldn't be. But this was a completely unique situation, and there were problems which, because of the extreme acts and the horrendous atrocities that have been committed on an unprecedented scale by and under the authority of Nazi leaders, these acts called for innovative and unprecedented measures. And I think that what happened in 1945 was a truly remarkable achievement. It was, as somebody said, a landmark. It was the product of remarkable jurists. You've heard mention of some of them. And it was also, I think, we shouldn't underestimate the fact that it was a remarkable political achievement on the part of the victorious Allies to get the Soviets and the US, the UK and France, all of them to reach the degree of agreement that they did was remarkable. Of course, there were political compromises had to be made in order to ensure that the Soviets in particular were on board, and I think the US too. And again, it's easy to be critical in a purist sense. But the fact is that what was achieved, I think, was unquestionably far better than just putting these people up against a wall and shooting them. Far better in the sense that it appealed very much more to our sense of justice than anything like that could possibly do. But also, on a different level, very important because it enabled the world to be told, and in 1945 the world didn't know very much about what had been going on. It's very easy for us to forget that now in the early part of the 21st century, when now so much is known. But it was very important that these stories were told, and that the full horror was deployed so far as it was possible to do in the light of the information that was then available to the world at large. And as you've heard, the Nuremberg Tribunal was really the forerunner of a number of tribunals which followed. I think it was, to some extent, part of the inspiration for the European Convention on Human Rights, with which I'm very much more familiar than with war crimes trials. The situation we now have with the International Criminal Court again, we'll touch on this no doubt, is far from perfect, as you've heard this morning. But in my view, it is far, far better than not having it at all. That doesn't mean to say we should be complacent. There is much more work to be done, in particular to persuade the big hitters like the States and China and so on to come on board. But a remarkable journey has been undertaken. It started with Nuremberg. There is a long way still to go, but I think we should, without being complacent, we should celebrate what has already been achieved. Thank you very much.